Welcome to a live taping of The Atlantic's new podcast, How to Build a Happy Life. Thank you to Equitable for supporting The Atlantic's journalism. And joining us now is contributing writer Lori Gottlieb and podcast host Arthur Brooks.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Atlantic Festival. I'm Arthur Brooks. I'm the author of the How to Build a Life column at the Atlantic. My column, How to Build a Life, is about well-being, life satisfaction. It's about happiness. And it comes about because that's what I study. That's what I study as an academic, but really that's what I study in life. One of the greatest revelations to me in my life was that I didn't have to be managed by my feelings. It's easy to feel like feelings are happening to you all the time. But I learned as a social scientist, but from people that I really respect, really admire, that if I become conscious of my feelings, I can at least partially manage them. And the same thing is true of our happiness. Happiness is not just a feeling. There's a lot of knowledge that goes into what it is. And by getting that knowledge, by practicing on the basis of that knowledge, we can actually manage our happiness. That's what I write about in my column. That's what I try to share with people in my life. Well, that's actually the basis of a new podcast as well. It accompanies my column in the Atlantic, How to Build a Life, and the podcast is called, even more on the nose, How to Build a Happy Life, and it's coming out soon. And today we're going to tape an episode of this new podcast. I'm really delighted because this opening episode of the podcast, it features one of the top psychotherapists in America today. I'm talking about the Atlantic's, of course, you know who I'm talking about, the Atlantic's Lori Gottlieb, the world famous psychotherapist who has a blockbuster column and best-selling books because, for the simple reason that she's helped so many people. I thought to myself, what could be better for kicking off How to Build a Happy Life than going kind of wholesale to retail? Let's start with the science of happiness. Let's discuss it, let's practice it, and let's talk about how we can share it with other people and really make it practical in our lives. And to do that, we need to do the social science, but we also need to talk to somebody who is a psychotherapist and brings these ideas to people every single day. Lori's the author of the amazing best-selling book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. It's a great title, too. We're going to talk through some of the how-tos of navigating the natural ups and downs in life. And later in the episode, we're going to feature some of my very favorite guest stars, which is you, our listeners. So let's start by saying hi to Lori. Welcome to How to Build a Happy Life, Lori.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here for the inaugural episode.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you here. I've been looking forward to working with you in some way for the longest time. And, I feel like because you and I have been writing these kind of parallel columns about a good life well lived in different parts of the value chain. I'm doing it more as a social scientist and you more as a psychotherapist. And sooner or later, we had to do one of these crossover episodes like they always do on TV, where characters from one show go on to another show. So what better way to do it than what we're doing today? And I'm appreciative of your work and appreciative of you taking time to join us today. I want to talk, absolutely. And I want to talk about some of just the basic science of happiness, not because our listeners don't know anything about that, but because I want to hear you talk about how what I do can be applied directly. And I want to make the point to our listeners that the things that we talk about in How to Build a Life, this is real life stuff. This is not just theory. This is not kind of gee whiz territory. As interesting as the science of happiness is, this is something that you're talking about with your patients. So what do you say? Do you want to talk about how to apply the science?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. When on the first day of class, I teach a class at the Harvard Business School called Leadership and Happiness. And the first day of class, I define happiness. Now, most of my students, they think happiness is a feeling. As I talked about in the introduction to the show, happiness is a feeling. That's wrong. I mean, happiness has a lot of feelings attached to it, and feelings are really important, but it's not a feeling per se. I describe happiness as more of the way that you would take apart a meal. Happiness is like a banquet, and you can define it in a lot of different ways in terms of the ingredients. You can define it in terms of the dishes, but I like to start with the macronutrients of any meal. Now, if you're eating literally a meal, the three macronutrients are protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And I say that similarly, there are three macronutrients to happiness. They are enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. People who are truly happy about their lives, they have all three, and they have them in abundance and they have them in balance. And people who are out of balance in enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose, they tend to define themselves as unhappy. They know that something is wrong with their happiness. And so when I'm talking to somebody who says, I'm really unhappy, I start digging in on one of those dimensions. And those are the dimensions I want to talk about today, because I know that these are the things that people present with when they come to you as a therapist, and you want them to help. They want you to help them. So that's where I want to start. And I want to start with the first of those, which is enjoyment. I define enjoyment as pleasure plus elevation, pleasure plus education. I mean, pleasure is kind of an animal thing, and you get pleasure from lots of things, and there's lots of neurochemistry that's attached to it. But when you learn something about the sources of your pleasures, it turns into authentic enjoyment, which is a part of a happy life. Do you agree with that?
I do. I would say that enjoyment plus connection. I really feel
Connection with
like
people.
connection.
Uh-huh.
Right, right. Well, there are solitary enjoyments. Let's say that you're an artist, or let's say that you're a musician, or let's say you're reading a book. That's enjoyable to you depending on who you are. But I think that when you talk about the ingredients, I think connection really has to be in there. And what I see in the therapy room is that when you look at those ingredients of happiness, um, if you don't have connection added to those ingredients, it's going to be hard. And I love the way that you are talking about happiness not as a feeling, because I think that happiness as a byproduct of living our lives in a meaningful way is what we all aspire to. But happiness as the goal in and of itself often is a recipe for disaster, because they're not looking at the ingredients that you're talking about. So
Hmm.
so I just wanted to clarify that point of,
Mhm.
when we're talking about how do you translate the science into lived experience. um, People without connection generally tend not to find themselves. They're the people who come and say, I'm not very happy.
Mm, yeah, for sure. And this is completely uh, uh, consistent with the findings of Bob Waldinger and George Valiant and all those guys who have done all that longitudinal work that shows that the happiest people in their 70s and 80s are people who established the most human connections in their 20s and 30s. They got really, really good at love. They've got good love chops, is the bottom line. And so this is the number one ingredient probably in enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose is human connection. But it's really
Right.
important to
And
point that out, that enjoyment, right?
well, right. And I think that the question that people ask themselves, I think that we all ask ourselves when it comes to happiness, is how can I love and be loved? I think that that is the essential question. And so, that's where the enjoyment, I think, comes from too, is what does it mean to not only love someone and be loved, but how do you love yourself too? And so often we don't know how to do that. We can make ourselves incredibly unhappy by being unloving to ourselves.
I want to talk about this specific macronutrient of enjoyment here for a second. It's one of the characteristics of people who present with clinical depression is a syndrome called anhedonia, which all that means is the inability to experience pleasure and enjoyment. And even if you're not clinically depressed, clearly, if you're having a hard time enjoying things, you're going to be unhappy, as we just talked about a minute ago. And even better, if you're enjoying things in connection, in communion with other people, because that actually creates the most fulfillment. But do you see patients who, because of whatever is going on in their lives, because of an over sense of discipline, or because they're excessively stoic, or for whatever reason, that they have insufficient enjoyment of their lives? And if so, what do you tell them? How can I enjoy my life more?
Well, this is kind of like a chicken or the egg thing. So, anhedonia is when people are depressed, they literally cannot experience joy in the things that would normally bring them joy if they were not depressed. So, it's not that they don't know how to enjoy things, it's that because of the depression, they aren't enjoying activities that would normally be pleasurable to them. But yes, I think that there are people who don't know, so separate from that, there are people who don't know how to have fun. And I think that we think somehow in our culture today of, ambition and moving forward, and all of the sort of pressures, that people think that fun is frivolous. They don't realize that it's actually essential. So when you talk about enjoyment, people think, well, that's optional, like if I have time. And then, of course, they don't make the time because they think that it's something that is not necessary. And it absolutely is.
So what's an example of, somebody who would come to you and they're not enjoying their lives, they're not taking time to have fun? What's the assignment that you give them? Because in your show, you give somebody an assignment and then you see how it's going. So what would you, if I came to you and I said, yeah, I just don't know how to have fun. I work and I work and I work all the time, and I'm not very happy. And you'd say, Arthur, do these 3 things. What's the kind of thing that you would tell me? What's the assignment?
Well, actually, on the Dear Therapist podcast, so we do a therapy session with people, and then, as you said, we give them a homework assignment that they have a week to do, and they report back to us. We had this actually 16-year-old on who presented with this exact issue. She said, I am just like trying to get into college. I'm doing all of these things. I never have any fun. And so we gave her an assignment where we wanted her to have more balance in her life, and we gave her a specific assignment. This is the Libby episode in season 1. And she was somebody who was very reluctant to do this because she thought that it would somehow hold her back, that it would somehow make her less competitive for college, that it would, affect her in a way, because nobody around her was having fun, by the way. And everybody was pretending to have fun. On social media, it looks like everybody's having just a great time. But in reality, everybody was really stressed out and nobody was making time for fun. And so she did that. And she found that not only when she made time for fun did she enjoy her life more, but she found that actually it made her more productive. It actually helped her to get ahead. And so it was interesting because I think that we have this idea that, having fun is going to hold us back somehow. And in theory, we want to have fun. But we don't actually say, I'm going to put that on my calendar. I'm going to make that a priority. And I think we really need to.
That's pretty interesting in our hyper-scheduled and highly schematized life, that certain people have to actually put it in their Outlook for 45 minutes, have fun. It seems like fun would be the most natural and spontaneous thing that people could have or do. And yet for people who are so scheduled all the way up into the tree, they actually need to treat it like anything else and take time for it, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think it needs to be specific too. It's not just have fun, right? It's getting in touch with how you have fun. A lot of people don't even know how they have fun anymore as adults. They grow up, they forgot what fun looks like because they're so busy with all of their responsibilities and then all of the things they think they need to be doing. And they don't realize, first of all, how they're spending their time. So many people say, I don't have time for this kind of thing. And yet if they actually do a 24-hour diary, which is what I will prescribe in therapy a lot, where they have to write down everything that they're doing for 24 hours and sometimes 48 hours. And when they realize that, they're like, oh my gosh, I spent like an hour and a half mindlessly scrolling through the internet. And it actually dampened their mood. It didn't, it wasn't a pleasurable activity for them. It was like, oh, I'm so behind. Look at what everybody else is doing. Or look at that person. They went to Hawaii and I don't get to go to Hawaii, or whatever it is. So it wasn't even a pleasurable activity. And then that hour and a half could have been spent doing something that would have actually brought them joy. And I want to use the word joy here because when we talk about, happiness, you're right. Happy is not an emotion. Joy is an emotion. And so what brings you joy? And so specifically, people don't know. They're like, if I had the time, what would fun even look like? I don't even know what that looks like. And so really being able to identify, how do you have fun? What does fun look like for you? So that when you schedule time to have fun or make time so that it becomes not a thing that you schedule after a while, but just something that's a natural part of your existence. What does that look like? People don't even know sometimes. If you said to them, how do you have fun? They look at me like, fun? What's that?
It's interesting that people don't know how to have fun, and maybe they used to, and maybe they've forgotten. So if they present to Lori Gottlieb and say, I'm not having any fun, or I don't have enough enjoyment in your life, the first assignment is not go have fun. The first assignment you're going to give them is think about the last time that you had fun. What were you doing, so that you can remember how to have fun in the first place? Is that right?
Yeah, and a good way to figure out what is fun for you is to look at your envy. People don't like to feel envy. They feel like it's kind of like a taboo. They don't want to feel that. They think that they're a bad person for feeling that. But actually, envy is very instructive. Envy tells us something about desire. And so I always say to people, follow your envy. It tells you what you want. And so when you are envious of someone or something or some experience, that's a clue to what might be enjoyable for you. We are so hesitant to look at our desire. We don't want to give space for desire. We're so much about the shoulds as opposed to the what do I want? What does desire look like for me? We feel like it's almost like a selfish act.
That's really interesting because one of the things that I talk about an awful lot in the study of discernment, which is a part of every philosophical and major religious tradition, from Buddhism to Judaism to Christianity and even Stoicism, that discernment is actually not about what should I do. Discernment is about what do I want. It's finding the nature of your own desire. And so that is as old as the hills, and yet it somehow escapes us again and again and again. And when I talk to young people, a lot of my students, they think they're trying to figure out what they want to do, and actually they should be thinking about trying to figure out what they want. That's what they really don't know, is what they want, and that's what you're trying to get at, right, Lori?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's so much noise out there where sometimes people can't hear themselves. So they conflate what society wants them to want, what their parents want them to want, what they have been, what the culture tells them is something they should want versus what they inherently want. And if it goes against some of those things, like some of those culturally accepted things of what we should want, it's very hard for them to even acknowledge that that's something that they want.
Let's move on to the second pillar, the second macronutrient of a happy life, which is satisfaction. Now, this is a killer. Satisfaction is really tough. I mean, Mick Jagger saying, I can't get no satisfaction. The truth is you can get satisfaction. The problem is you can't keep satisfaction. Satisfaction is the reward as when you meet a goal. It's the reward for a job well done. It's the promotion. It's the raise that you get. It's the little burst of joy that you get from meeting one of your own personal goals. And the big problem that people have is that they get a little burst of this joy, perhaps, but then it goes away. And then they're running again. And there's a whole lot of neurobiology about homeostasis that helps us understand this. And there's the metaphor of the hedonic treadmill that shows us why we keep running and running and running. And which is really good because it shows that after a little while, you're mostly running out of fear, because if you stop on a treadmill, you know what's going to happen. But the real question then becomes, how do we deal with that? I mean, satisfaction, you do need satisfaction to be a happy person, but you can't keep it. So what do you tell people who are workaholics and they're addicted to success and they're just trying and trying and trying, as Mick Jagger sang, to get satisfaction, and they're not getting it, and the result is that they're missing something from their lives? When somebody presents with the satisfaction dilemma, what do you tell them?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about the people who they present almost like a colander instead of a bowl. So it's kind of like, something goes in and it doesn't stay there. The satisfaction gets there and then like it just goes through the holes. It doesn't stay like in a bowl, right? And so it just seeps through every time. It doesn't last very long. And I think that the people who are happiest, when we talk about people, and I would say, I would use maybe the word contentment, the people who are most content, who feel most full and fulfilled in their lives, are people who are what are called satisficers. And this is Barry Schwartz from The Paradox of Choice. And he talks about the difference between satisficers and maximizers. And satisficers are the people who, let's say you're trying to buy a sweater and you go into a store and you find a sweater that fits you, it looks good, it's the right price, you buy it, you're happy, you're done, right? It meets all of your criteria. The maximizer will see that sweater, kind of put it under the other sweater so nobody will buy it just in case, go to the next store and keep looking because maybe they'll find something a little bit cheaper or a little bit more attractive or, whatever it is, right? Just something that's like a little bit better on some dimension. And they keep looking and then maybe they find it, maybe they don't. But if they do find it, they tend not to be as happy with that purchase as if they had just bought the original sweater. And if they don't find it, they regret that they didn't get the original one. And the problem is, even if they buy that first one, the maximizers, even if they buy that first sweater that met all their criteria, they might be happy for about a week, like you were saying. And then like the next week, they're like walking by a store and they see something else in the window and they think, oh, that one would have been better. And so they're just never satisfied with what they have. And you see this in relationships. People do this in relationships all the time too. It's not just with things like sweaters, it's with people, it's with jobs, it's with everything. So it's a kind of almost like a personality type. Like, are you a satisficer or are you a maximizer? Even when you're shopping on Amazon and you're trying to like, which set of cookware should I buy? And it's like the people who will spend like, an hour going through all the different options instead of like, 10 minutes going, oh, this is good, let me just get this. And it really takes up your emotional energy in a big way, because you're always thinking, it's almost like it's a perfectionism type of thing. And it really gets in the way because it takes up all of your energy, all of your time, and then you're never satisfied with what you have anyway.
That's really interesting. And what you're saying is, it sounds like kind of the Western version of what His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says, which is the secret to enduring satisfaction is not to have what you want, but you want what you have. The satisficer is one who wants what she has, and the maximizer is the one who's always he's always chasing, trying to have what he wants. And another way of thinking about this that actually works in the literature on the science of satisfaction is that you shouldn't think of your satisfaction as a function of what you have, but rather what you have divided by what you want. And if you can actually devise a wants management strategy, the denominator of that fraction is going to decrease and your satisfaction is actually going to rise. So how, when a patient presents with a satisfaction deficit, what specifically what assignment you give them on your show, if this is somebody who's unsatisfied, or if you have a patient who says, it's just nothing's good, Lori, nothing's good. What do you tell them to do specifically starting today?
I think this is the difference between what a friend would say to this person and what a therapist would say to this person, because what the friend tends to do is to say, look at all the wonderful things you have in your life, which is not helpful at all because they can't see it anyway. It's very funny when you look at the difference between how we talk to our friends and how a therapist might approach this, because I think that people would expect the therapist to do that, to say, well, look at all these things that you're not seeing. But no, indeed, in fact, what I would probably do is I would agree with them and say, yeah, it's really, I can see that you're really not satisfied. And then what happens for them is the more that you kind of go into their mindset, that they start to see something new, that they start to say, well, actually, I have this really great partner and I have this really great job. But, and then there are a lot of buts with that. And then, but they start to sort of change their mindset when you're not arguing with them about whether they should be satisfied or not. You can't convince someone to be satisfied with what they have. They have to come to it on their own. And, and I think that a lot of people have very low tolerance for people like this because they feel like, well, you have so much, how can you complain? But I think it speaks to something in our culture, which is we don't really value what's important. We don't really value what's going to bring us happiness. And so people tend to take for granted all of the things that they do have that would normally bring a person happiness.
That's really interesting. And it actually leads, which we'll touch on briefly before we go to our listeners, about the last macronutrient of happiness, which is maybe the hardest of all, which is purpose or meaning. And the reason that this is really hard is because it's the most counterintuitive when it comes to the science of happiness. When I ask in surveys, large scale surveys or experiments using human subjects, what brings happiness and purpose to life, people always talk about the most painful parts of their lives. They never talk about, that week in Ibiza with my friends. They never say that's when I actually found out my life's meaning. They always talk about that divorce, that ugly breakup, when I got fired, that bankruptcy, when, my kid had to go to rehab. That's when they talk about, the stuff that they were made of and when they really understood the nature of their own souls. And yet, back before you and I were little kids and the hippies were running around in the 60s and 70s, and the Woodstock generation said, if it feels good, do it, right? But now, young people on either side of us that bookended people like you and me, their mantra seems to be, if it feels bad, make it stop. Paradoxically, if we don't suffer, if we don't have pain, if we don't come to terms with having a life that's fully alive with the good and the bad, we can't actually get enough meaning and purpose in our life, right?
Well, that's right. And I think that's why we assign negative and positive connotations to feelings, even though feelings are neutral. They don't have a positive or negative connotation. So people say, like, joy is a positive feeling, and anger or anxiety or sadness are negative feelings. And that's just not true. All of our feelings are positive in the sense that they tell us what we want. Our feelings are like a compass. They tell us what direction to go in. And if you don't access your feelings, you're kind of walking around with a faulty GPS. You don't know what direction to go in. And people think that if they kind of numb their feelings, like, oh, it's not a big deal because I have a roof over my head and food on the table, so this sadness, this anxiety, this insomnia, whatever it is, this relational difficulty, it's okay because, it seems very trivial to them, but it's not. It's actually a message. It's telling you something about your life. It's telling you about something that needs to change. And so people feel like, like numbness isn't nothingness. It's not the absence of feelings. Numbness is actually a sense of being overwhelmed by too many feelings. And then they come out in other ways, like too much food, too much wine, an inability to sleep, a short-temperedness, a lack of focus. You see how the feelings are there. They're just presenting differently. And so I think it's really important for people to notice their feelings and to really welcome their feelings and embrace their feelings, because the feelings give them information about, if you're sad, what is not working? If you're anxious, what is causing the anxiety? If you're angry, are there some boundaries that maybe you need to set, right? Is there something you need to change in your life? What is going on? So I think that that's really important. And when we talk about meaning and purpose, if you don't listen to your feelings, they're going to direct you in the direction of meaning and purpose. They're going to tell you what is important.
It's interesting, most of the great sages and saints throughout history have talked about the sacredness of suffering, and some pretty wise and interesting people today do too. I mean, there was a famous interview of Stephen Colbert by Anderson Cooper, where Stephen Colbert talks about the most painful time in his life when his father and one of his siblings was killed in a plane crash. And he talks about how grateful he is even for that experience because of the sacredness of every moment of his life, including the pain. He says, look, if you're going to be fully alive, if you're going to have a life, if you're going to enjoy life per se, you got to take it all. If you're thankful for life, you got to be thankful for all of life, because that's the fabric of your set of experiences. And it seems to me that is the essence of how you find your meaning and the essence of how you understand who you are as a person, according to what you just told me, right?
I don't think that you need to suffer tragedy to feel gratitude. I think that sometimes it awakens us to feeling gratitude when you have some kind of tragedy in your life, but I don't think that you need to have some kind of tragedy. But I do think that you don't get through life without suffering in some way. So it doesn't need to be that a relative dies in a plane crash. I think that just being human inherently means that there are going to be times that you struggle. And I think if you look at the world today, if you look at, there's so much suffering that we hear about every day in the world, but then what are we told? If you look at social media, for example, or you're at a dinner party, nobody talks about that. Nobody wants to talk about that. It's all like, let's pretend everything's great. And I think it's both and. And if we don't make room for the both and, then you're right, that we don't see the beauty. We don't appreciate the beauty in life. It's almost like you can't, people always say, like, I want to mute the sadness, or I want to mute the pain. And it's like, you can't mute the pain and then also feel joy. If you mute one aspect of your emotional experience, you're going to mute all of them. There's like one mute button. So if you mute the pain, you mute the joy. And so I think that speaks to what you're saying.
Yeah, no. And there's one clarification you made that's incredibly important that I want to underline so everybody listening remembers. Lori Gottlieb just said that you don't have to go out looking for suffering. Don't worry, suffering will find you. And that's adequate for us to find the meaning and purpose in our lives. Lori, I want to go and listen to some of our, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a difference between pain and suffering too. So, there's pain is is like, we all experience pain. You go through a breakup, you go through a divorce, somebody gets ill, something happens with your job, whatever it is, right? We all experience pain of some sort, but suffering is something that sometimes we do to ourselves. So it's like you go through a divorce and then you're like looking on social media at your ex, and you see them with their new partner, right? And, you don't need to do that. That's suffering. You're creating your own suffering. So people do that all the time. And so, we're all going to experience pain in some way or another, but sometimes we are creating our own suffering. And in therapy, that's a big topic of conversation, is how are we creating our own suffering, even though, of course, pain is inevitable.
I want to go now to some of our listeners. And, I put out a call at the end of my column asking people to tell me the last time they were happy. And what we got back was just pure gold. They were so interesting and so moving. And I wanted to play just 3 clips of people telling me about the last time that they were happy, and get your reaction to what they're saying and, what it says to you. I could analyze this from the social science guy, but I'm a lot more interested in what you'd tell these people if they were coming to see you for help. So let's bring up audio clip number 1, who's one of our listeners, Carl from North Carolina.
My name is Carl Ron, and I live in North Carolina. The last time I felt truly happy was yesterday. I am a high school English teacher, and we're now back in person. We're lucky enough to be in a school where we wear masks. I was able to actually see their, if not their faces, their eyes light up when they figured out something or they got the point of my lesson. And I don't know, just seeing their eyes light up and getting to exercise that teaching muscle that I haven't really gotten to exercise in over a year and a half, getting to be in front of the students again makes me feel truly like myself again. Something that I really haven't felt in a long time. So, yeah, teaching makes me happy.
Isn't that beautiful, Lori? And it seems to me that he made your point. It's connection. It's connection. That's the secret. Love, happiness is love, right?
Right. Well, it's meaning and purpose and connection all rolled into one. That was so beautiful. We had someone on our Dear Therapist podcast during the pandemic, a teacher also, and she was talking about this, like wanting to reach her students, and how they said to her, like, the best part of my day is when I get to connect with you, right? And so I think that, we learned a lot during COVID about meaning and purpose and connection, and I think this clip was very much all of that.
Yeah, it seems to me that Carl from North Carolina can teach a lot of people who are struggling, and they're struggling to get their happiness chops back after the coronavirus epidemic. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, I think I'm going to work from home forever, and I'm doing pretty well not seeing other humans. And I think that it seems to me that we can be a lot lonelier than we think we are. And so getting out and seeing human beings again is really important, even if it's uncomfortable at first, right?
Right. And also, I just want to say that what's so nice about his clip is that meaning and purpose people think it has to be this big, epic thing. It doesn't. Meaning can be, I had this moment with my child, and we had this great 5 minutes together. Or just like with Carl, I had this experience with my students, and I saw their eyes light up when they got the lesson. That right there is meaning and purpose. And it doesn't need to be this grand thing. It's like, it's the dailiness of it. It's having lots of bursts of meaning and purpose throughout your day.
And that actually speaks to what you talked about with satisfaction, because, satisfaction, if you're looking for it in some one big thing, it's probably going to disappoint you. But if you're looking at the little things that happen over the course of a day and over the course of a life regularly, you've got a shot. That's important too. Let's turn now to. Go ahead.
I was going to say, often I will give people this assignment in therapy and even on the podcast, which is, I want you to write down the different moments in the day when you feel something positive. right? That feel something positive to you. And often there are these moments of meaning, these moments of connection. And there are so many during the day that they didn't even realize, even if it's like, I went to Starbucks and I saw this barista who's been there for 5 years, and we used to talk every day, and I missed that during COVID. And now it was so great to see each other again. And I realized this is meaningful to me. It's like those little moments throughout the day that you don't even pay attention to. And all of a sudden you say, wait, those are really important to me.
Right. So Carl is doing great because he's back in the classroom. I want to now go to Kristen in New York, who's struggling more. Let's go to clip number 2, Kristen in New York.
My name is Kristen Wilson, and I'm in New York City. The last time I remember being truly happy was in the summer of 2019. I had just ended my first year of grad school. I was living in Japan, in Tokyo. I'd already been there for 5 years, so I'd become quite accustomed to living there and found myself in a great group of friends. We were really close-knit, the kind we were always hanging out or making dinner plans, and felt like I had kind of found a place where I really belonged, which was something that had been a struggle for me before. And then the night that I had to leave to say goodbye, there was this gorgeous sunset. I just felt that I was really, truly happy with where I was in life, with who I was with, and with what I was doing. And looking back from there, it kind of feels like everything has just been this slow and then sudden descent, because when I got back to Japan, my friends began to graduate and move away, and then the pandemic came. And like many people, I spent months alone in my apartment. So it was just really lonely. And then my visa was expiring, so I had to leave my community that I'd spent 6 years building, and into this period of great uncertainty. And then my mother died, suddenly and unexpectedly. And since then, I've been living in the after, and I feel like I will never experience that kind of happiness again like I did that summer. Being so devastated by grief and loss, it just feels like whatever way joy manages to find its way back into my life, it will always be different. But I'll never be happy like that again.
What do you say, Lori?
Wow, just so much loss and grief. And what she's experiencing is so common, because I think that when we're in the throes of that, we feel like we will never experience joy again. We will never experience happiness again in the same way. And actually, in my book, and maybe you should talk to someone, there's one client that I write about, and he was talking about how his son was killed in a car accident, and he just, within a week of that, where he was devastated and he thought, my life is over, I will never be the same again. He was with his daughter and they were playing a game, and he laughed, and he said, I couldn't believe that I laughed. I couldn't believe that I actually could laugh, that I, like, what was that part of me that could do that, even though the rest of me felt dead and like I would never come alive again. And so I think what she's feeling is extremely common, and that's what grief looks like. And she's going to have a lot of grieving to do, and it's unfortunate that her mother died in the middle of COVID, when she was so isolated and she had lost her community and all of these other things had happened. So she's experiencing multiple layers of loss, and I hope that she allows herself the space to really grieve all that she has lost, so that she can then start to emerge again.
And I think a really important part of your message, Lori, and what you just said, and I think that I want people to remember from this, is that, and I want Kristen to remember, is that happiness is going to come again. That isn't the end. It feels like the end because that's how it always feels when you're in a period of grief. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. There's all kinds of science behind that, but happiness is going to come again. It just is, right?
Well, it reminds me of when people are depressed, they feel like they will never be happy. And so I always say to people who are in the middle of a clinical depression, you are not the best person to talk to you about you right now, right? Because their thinking is so distorted in that moment, because they can't see it. They can't imagine a time when they would experience joy again. And the same thing, I think, when people, have experienced a devastating loss, they cannot imagine experiencing joy. And yet what happens later, just like the John in the book, It's like people go to weddings and they go grocery shopping and they go on Twitter and their lives move on and they don't move. There's this expression like people say, well, why haven't you moved on? Moved on is not quite right. It's you move forward. The loss stays with you, but you move forward and you're still grieving. You will always grieve that loss. And I think that the grief is a sign of how much love there was with the person who is no longer there, right? And then loss of the community. She loved those people. So that's going to be there, but it feels different. It has a different flavor over time. It has a different resonance. And there will be times when you're standing in an elevator and some song comes on and it's the song that, meant something with that person and you just start bawling in the elevator or whatever it is. That's what grief looks like, even, decades later. So I think that's part of the human experience, and what you were talking about earlier, Arthur, about this idea of meaning and struggle and how they're somehow intertwined in some way.
One of the things that's so interesting that when you talk to older people who are happy and well, and it's pretty easy to find these people. The dead giveaway, by the way, is crow's feet in the corners of the eyes, because that's when people who've been experiencing the so-called Duchenne smile. There's these orbicularis oculi muscles at the corners of the eyes, and they give you crow's feet. And so if you want to find a happy old person, look for somebody with very pronounced crow's feet. And when you talk to those people, what you find is that they suffered a lot. It's weird, for young people in their 20s, and they want to find out, how to have a happy life, and they want to avoid as much suffering as possible so that in their 80s they'll be really happy. That's actually wrong. In the same way that, something that's a really delicious dessert actually has salt in it. And the afternoon of your life requires that the morning have had a certain number of challenges. And so you find that the happiest people have been fully alive all throughout their lives, and they've grieved and they've recovered. And when bad things were happening, they never thought they'd feel better. And guess what? They did. And they allowed themselves to be sad. And that's one of the secrets, right?
Right. And I think that the reason that they've been through so much is because they engaged in life. So the people who want to protect themselves from pain or discomfort are the people who never really engage in life, because they're so busy protecting themselves to make sure that they're not going to experience anything that feels bad. Right. And so then they never put themselves out there. They never take any risks. And when you take risks, sometimes, there's going to be pain involved. And sometimes there's going to be great joy involved. But if you are protecting yourself the whole time, you didn't really live. You're not fully alive. And so maybe you think you protected yourself, but you end up feeling very unsatisfied, very kind of empty and lonely.
If you're going to live your life like an adventure, you're going to have to take some chances. Let's go to the last audio clip to finish this out, Lori. This is Joel in Park City, Utah. Let's go to the third clip.
Hi, my name is Joel Marsh, and I own Marsh Painting Incorporated in Park City, Utah, and I'm a fourth-generation painter. Arthur Brooks is correct in this column when he states that what matters not is so much the what of a job, but more the who and the why. At Marsh Painting, an employee finds a culture that embraces common daily goals, a clear plan on how to accomplish them, and the problem-solving abilities for when things go awry. Our work is often very physically demanding. We recently were hand brushing every piece of wood on the exterior of a 10,000 square foot home. One day as we were staying in the home, we took a 10-minute break and hit golf balls onto the adjoining driving range, with the homeowner's permission, of course. The guys enjoyed watching each other hack away at the ball and poked fun at each other the rest of the week. Our work painting houses is hard and boring much of the time. I tell new recruits that more often than not, when you have good music going, some good Mexican food for lunch, and you get into a rhythm with the rest of the guys, our job can feel a little zen.
Well, Lori, we're pretty much near the end of the time, so let's have this be kind of the last word. What's your big takeaway, and what's the big lesson that people should get from this incredibly encouraging message from Joel in Park City?
Yeah, that was really beautiful. I was thinking about how before COVID, people used to say coworkers are overrated. People are like, I really want to work from home or whatever it is. Coworkers are not overrated. I think that if we've learned anything, it's those small moments, like he was talking about, those spontaneous moments of like, hey, let's hit the golf balls, right? The things that you don't expect, those just moments of connection that happen when you're in the same space with other people and you have a shared experience. And I think that that's what we need to look for in general in our days, no matter whether it's at work or in our families or in our social circles or whatever it is. How can we show up? When you show up, those moments of connection happen.
Well, the practice of enjoyment and satisfaction and purpose through pain and through love and all the experience that is the beautiful thing that we call life, courtesy of Lori Gottlieb. Lori Gottlieb is the author of the best-selling book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, of the wonderful, wonderful column, Dear Therapist, my colleague at The Atlantic. What a privilege, what a joy it's been to be with you during this time. Thank you for joining all of us on How to Build a Happy Life.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for the conversation.
How to Build a Happy Life wants to give you a wide range of advice and concrete tools to improve your daily life. In this series, I want to figure out how we can live more joyful lives. Through scientific discussions and an exploration of what happiness is, I'll uncover the how-tos of happy living and assign you exercises to make happiness a daily practice. Tune in as I explore loneliness, friendships, mindfulness, and meditation with psychologists, friends, and experts, and reveal the wisdom and skills necessary for building a happier life. Download it today on your favorite app, or find it on youtube.com/user/TheAtlantic.
While we're on a break, we encourage you to network with other attendees and visit our expo booths. To participate, select the networking icon located on the left-hand side of the screen. Next, click Join, and you'll be randomly paired with another attendee for about 5 minutes. If you wish, you can exchange virtual information with each other and keep in contact via direct message within the platform. You can also click the Explore icon to visit our virtual expo booths. Here you can explore more resources from the Atlantic and our underwriters related to today's event. We'll see you shortly after the break.